Meet Alex and Dan. They are both 32 years old, live in the exact same suburban zip code in Dallas, and both pull in exactly $105,000 a year working mid-level corporate jobs. On paper, they are financial twins. But if you look at their Saturday mornings, you will see a massive divide. Alex's alarm goes off at 5:30 a.m. He chugs a lukewarm coffee and immediately fires up his laptop to grind through a batch of cheap freelance design contracts. By noon, he shifts gears, gets into his car, and spends the next 6 hours driving for a ride-share app. Alex is hunting the holy grail of modern internet finance, the mythical 7 streams of income. He believes he is hustling his way to financial freedom. Dan is entirely different. On Saturday morning, Dan is sleeping in. He wakes up at 9, goes to the gym, plays a round of golf, and spends his afternoon reading a book or watching a game. He does zero freelance work. He drives for nobody. He has exactly 1 stream of income. Fast forward exactly 3 years to 2026. If you listen to mainstream financial advice, you would assume Alex the hustler is miles ahead. You would assume he is building an empire while Dan gets left behind. You would be dead wrong. Alex is completely burnt out, mathematically poor, and drowning in hidden tax liabilities. Dan just closed on his second investment property and effortlessly bumped his primary salary to $145,000. For the last decade, we have been aggressively sold a financial lie. The advice was everywhere. Start a side hustle, monetize your hobbies, never rely on a single paycheck. But a brutal psychological and economic shift has occurred over the last few years. The side hustle has mutated from a wealth-building tool into a toxic financial trap. We need to talk about why working harder on the weekends is actually making you poorer, and why the relentless pursuit of multiple income streams is exactly what is keeping you broke. To understand why Alex is failing, you have to understand the psychological trap he fell into. We live in an era of extreme hustle fatigue. If you are a high-income earner today, you carry around this bizarre, low-level guilt whenever you aren't doing something productive. Well then, what can we do is extreme, lost. If you spend 3 hours on a Sunday playing video games or taking a nap, a voice in your head tells you that you are falling behind. You feel like you should be editing videos, drop shipping, or consulting. This guilt drives professionals into what economists call the premium, mediocre lifestyle. It is the illusion of luxury. It is leasing a $700 a month car you can't really afford, buying expensive organic groceries, and upgrading your phone every year, but secretly funding that lifestyle by selling your weekend time for pennies. You feel rich because you have a nice car, but you are completely impoverished when it comes to time and energy. You have to look at the historical precedent to see why the math no longer works. Think back to the aftermath of the 2008 housing crash. A whole generation watched people lose their jobs and their homes because they relied on one company. The traumatic response to 2008 was to diversify. The birth of the gig economy in the 2010s felt like a miracle. Back in 2014, driving your car on the weekends or doing freelance graphic design was actually profitable. The tech platforms were heavily subsidized by venture capital money, so they paid out great margins to acquire users. But this is not 2014 anymore. We are sitting in a K-shaped economy, which means the gap between those who own assets and those who sell their labor is splitting aggressively. It is eerily similar to the 1970s stagflation era. In the 70s, inflation outpaced wages so fast that the middle class had to take on second jobs just to tread water against the price of gas and food. Today, the inflation is entirely in housing, healthcare, and education. You cannot out-hustle a housing market that goes up by 20% in a year simply by picking up a few extra Uber shifts. Let me show you the exact math of why the side hustle is destroying your wealth. I call this the exhaustion tax. Let's break down Alex's situation. He works an extra 20 hours a week on his side hustles. That is roughly 1,000 extra out a year, more than the other side of $1.4 million and $200 million of $1.5 million worth of records to run this side. Let's say he grosses an extra $20,000. When that money hits his bank account, he feels like a financial genius. But let's anchor this to reality. As a 1,099 independent contractor, Alex owes a 15.3% self-employment tax right off the top. Add in his 24% federal income tax bracket because his primary corporate job already pushed his baseline income up. Then add a conservative 5% state income tax. Alex is losing over 44% of that side income strictly to taxes. His $20,000 is instantly reduced to around $11,000. Now, subtract the invisible costs. I would be the reason why he was so willing to live in colleges, the extra gas, and the convenience food he buys because he is too tired to cook. He actually clears maybe $8,000 in pure profit. He just traded $1,000 of his one finite life for $8 an hour, and that assumes he can even secure the work. We have to address the reality of 2026. Generative AI has completely saturated the freelance markets for writing, coding, marketing, and design. Platforms like Upwork and Fiverr have experienced a massive race to the bottom. Why would a client pay Alex $50 an hour to write copy or design a logo when an AI tool does it in 3 seconds for a fraction of a cent? The algorithms control the workflow, the platforms take massive commission cuts, and the gig worker is left fighting for scraps. This brings us to the ultimate cost of the exhaustion tax, the opportunity cost. Because Alex is constantly grinding on the weekends for $8 an hour, he is perpetually exhausted. He shows up to his primary job on Monday morning with brain fog. He does the bare minimum to get by. When a massive project opens up that could lead to a promotion, Alex passes on it because he literally doesn't have the bandwidth. Now look at Dan. Dan used a concept called asymmetric focus. Then realized, you do not need 7 mediocre streams of income. You need exactly 2 things: a highly optimized primary income and appreciating assets. Instead of spending 1,000 hours a year grinding for $8,000, Dan spent just 50 hours total studying for an advanced industry certification. Because he actually rested on the weekends, his brain was sharp. He used that clarity to dominate a high-visibility project at his company. Armed with his new certification and a massive win at work, he walked into his boss's office and negotiated a 30% raise. That raise added $40,000 to his base salary. And here is the absolute kicker. Dan gets that extra $40,000 every single year for the rest of his career, working the exact same 40 hours a week he was already working. He didn't have to give up his Saturdays. He didn't have to track complex 1,999 deductions. He achieved extreme career leverage. Dan then took that extra money and aggressively deployed it into the S&P 500 and real estate. His money started working for him while he was sleeping, while he was golfing, and while he was sitting on the couch. I want to issue a firm reality check right here. If you are currently making minimum wage, if you just lost your job, or if you are buried under suffocating credit card debt, you do what you have to do to survive. A second job to keep the lights on and feed your family is an absolute necessity. There is no shame in survival, but if you are a professional making 80, 100, or 120 grand a year, your side hustle is actively keeping you poor. It is a distraction disguised as ambition. In today's hyper-efficient, asset-driven economy, relentlessly monetizing your free time does not make you rich. It ruins your mental health, spikes your cortisol, and prevents you from focusing on the only thing that actually builds wealth, multiplying the value of your primary skill set and aggressively buying assets that compound without your physical labor. But here is the terrifying part. Even if you do exactly what Dan did, even if you completely drop the toxic side hustles, maximize your primary salary, and focus entirely on career leverage, you might still end up completely broke. There is a massive, silent wealth killer wiping out high-income professionals right now, and it has absolutely nothing to do with how many hours you work or how much you invest. It is a psychological and systemic trap that six-figure earners fall into every single day without even realizing it. If you do not fix this one specific blind spot, everything you just learned about optimizing your income will fail. You need to understand the phantom debt crisis. I break down exactly why high-income earners are secretly broke and the exact steps you must take to protect yourself right here in this video. Click it on your screen right now, and I'll see you over there.